Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest installment of the Jones Point Navigator series, where we bring together thought leaders and innovators operating at the crossroads of healthcare markets and policy. Today, we're thrilled to be joined by Jason Mulvihill of Capital Asset Strategies to talk about the June 8th Senate Finance Committee hearing on consolidation and corporate ownership in healthcare. Jason, thanks so much for joining us. Before we dive into the meat of the hearing and some of the takeaways, I'd love if you give us a bit of background on yourself and what you guys do at Capital Asset Strategies.
Well, thanks, Tommy. Looking forward to the discussion. I'm the president and founder of Capital Asset Strategies, and what we do is provide strategic guidance and advice and risk management to financial services firms. So we deal at the intersection of Wall Street and Washington and try to help firms navigate through legislative, regulatory, and transactional issues.
That's great. And given your background as the former COO and general counsel of the American Investment Council, your expertise and experience of congressional interest in private equity's role in healthcare is well suited for our discussion today. So thanks so much for joining us.
You bet. Thank you.
Sure. So going to the hearing, yesterday Senate Finance held the hearing covering a lot of ground and really a lot of different topics across the concept of consolidation in healthcare. For our audience, which can be private equity companies and portfolio companies, I would argue that it was kind of a neutral to maybe slightly positive outcome because it was such a broad focus and they touched on a lot of different actors within the healthcare space. But would love your take on it, Jason. And what do you think, Finance Committee was looking for and whether they accomplished those goals?
Yeah, I think it was interesting. So many members from Chair Wyden on down talked about the importance of, enhancing patient results, increasing efficiency where they could, reducing costs, and preventing, unnecessary consolidation. And it took a while for the hearing to wind around to it, but towards the end of the hearing, Senator Cassidy mentioned that actually private equity is frankly often a solution to the problems of consolidation in healthcare. And I think, more broadly, zooming out a little bit, private equity has played a tremendously positive role in healthcare in the provider space and elsewhere. And so I think the hearing, there were several people who sort of mentioned the word and the phrase private equity, but there really weren't a lot of in-depth assessments of it. And so, I think you're right that it could have been a worse hearing than it turned out to be. But I think there are some good, important takeaways for the industry from the hearing.
Thanks so much. And I would agree. I think it was particularly interesting that Senator Warren from Massachusetts, who, has a track record of aggressive oversight of private equity role in healthcare, actually used her time to talk about Medicare Advantage and their role in consolidation, which I thought was interesting and beneficial for the industry. So transitioning a bit to some of the, we'll call it healthcare specific takeaways, Senator Wyden, the role of private equity in healthcare is one of his top priorities as chairman. But I think what was interesting about the hearing is that we touched on a couple healthcare specific issues that might be interesting for funds to know, both from a portfolio company perspective as well as from a diligence perspective. So first, in the hospice sector, the chairman mentioned that there's an active oversight investigation going on for private equity's role in hospice. So something certainly for operators to be cognizant of. Two, it did seem like there was a discussion around using site-neutral policies as potential solve for the broader issues of consolidation, whether it's hospitals acquiring physician practices, private equity acquiring them, or insurance companies. So that's something that folks should be cognizant of as they're going through a diligence process of the impact of site neutrality. But one thing I'd love your take on Jason is, there's a lot of discussion, and you mentioned Senator Cassidy, of the role and the impact on physician practices from all this consolidation. So I'd love your kind of take on that part of the discussion, because it's really interesting from a healthcare policy perspective.
Yeah, sure. Again, I think a lot of the hearing had focused on, what happens when a large hospital organization comes calling at a physician practice and wants to acquire it, or an insurance company does the same. And I think Senator Cassidy mentioned the fact, it's true, is that private equity investing in the healthcare provider space, the physician practice space, provides physicians with a lot of options that they otherwise wouldn't have. In other words, it enables continued competition. It can also encourage the growth and maintenance of healthcare options in rural areas, for example, and other places. There was a Politico healthcare summit earlier in the week, and one of the featured companies that was talked about at that event was a company called GoHealth, which is a private equity backed emergency and urgent care facility company that a few years ago, before private equity's backing, had 4 employees. Now it has over 4,000 healthcare workers and 260 locations. And it helps to provide care that can be integrated with hospitals to people at the point of care where they need the assistance. So in smaller communities, there obviously were a number of senators who are on the finance committee who have rural districts in their states. Private equity has played and can continue to play a very helpful role in ensuring that high quality care is provided and high quality options are there for patients from more rural areas. And so to sort of dovetail off what we were talking about with physician practices, also in providing sort of healthcare options in the rural space, private equity is quite often one of the better solutions that can be provided. So I think, making sure that for firms that are looking to invest or are investing, I think it's very important to always be cognizant of the story of your underlying business, the facts of the business before it was private equity owned. Some of those businesses may have been struggling. They may be dealing with challenges, or they could be younger businesses that are poised for growth, but they need the capital and expertise investment. And I think it's just important for the private equity firms, their funds and their portfolio companies to always be cognizant of their story. And based off of the hearing yesterday, to the extent possible, highlight how their investments help lead to, better patient outcomes, help lead to, better results for providers, better results for hospitals and everyone in the segment. I think that's an important message to get, not only more generally, but of course to, regulators and legislators in Washington who are concerned with private equity's role in healthcare.
Now, those are some great points, Jason, especially on the rural side of things. I think as folks like ourselves who've been in Washington for a number of years, that rural healthcare piece is something that, traditionally and probably will continue to have broad bipartisan interest and focus. And there's always, focus on, what are the policies that can make sure that people have access, whether it's telemedicine or other services like that. I think it's very well said. So the last thing, before we go here is I want to just touch on the FTC, right? The role of the FTC in consolidation, again, more broadly across all of healthcare, came up a number of times. Obviously, the Biden administration FTC has been very active both in the healthcare space and outside the healthcare space. So would love your opinion on kind of the delay of the land from an FTC perspective, but also advice to funds out there about how to navigate this more challenging and more, I think we could say, aggressive, FTC's view of competition policy.
Yeah, it's a challenging environment for mergers of all kinds. And it's, I think, also particularly challenging in the healthcare space. And I, years and years ago, began my career as an antitrust attorney. So, certainly have looked at and seen many different iterations of and areas of focus at the FTC and at DOJ antitrust. I think for firms that are considering mergers, in the healthcare space, I think it's very important to, make sure you have addressed any possible competitiveness challenges that could arise. I think it's important to make sure that you tell the best, honest, good story that you can about why this merger is going to be a net positive for competition, not just something necessarily that won't harm competition, but also I think telling the positive side of the coin. And I think part of the desire to do that stems from the fact that Chair Khan and the FTC right now is very, very skeptical of mergers, particularly in the healthcare space, but elsewhere. And so, it's my hope going forward, of course, that the FTC, remains focused only on mergers that actually have a legitimate competitiveness concern. In other words, it isn't really the purview of the FTC to conduct a broader industrial policy about who they want to merge with what. What they're really tasked to do is to try to prevent mergers that could cause competitive harm in the marketplace. And it's my hope that they will focus more on that and less on stopping all mergers just because they're mergers.
That's great, Jason. And I did not know of your antitrust background, so it's particularly insightful given the history there. Well, thanks again for joining us today. As we would discuss, wanted to keep this kind of brief for some quick takeaways for folks, but I certainly would encourage people that are interested in chatting more with Jason to reach out directly to him and get a better sense of what his firm does. As I think there's a lot of applications and utility across all financial services companies. So thanks again, Jason, and look forward to doing this again soon.
Thanks very much, Tommy. Take care.